Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Patrick Nelson. His work is motivated by his personal mission to inspire others and influence the future, and this mission was born out of his experience as a paratrooper in the U.S. Army, where he led soldiers during 3 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan and earned a Bronze Star Medal and a Purple Heart. During one of his deployments, his failure as a leader led to one of his soldiers being killed in combat, while he was only peppered in the back with shrapnel. And this life-changing experience set him on a path to help others not repeat his same mistake. Today's conversation, I think you'll find quite insightful, particularly as it comes to issues of leadership, safety, holding yourself accountable, influencing others, adapting your leadership style for the benefit of others. And there's a bonus in here that I think you'll find quite interesting when it comes to overcoming a deep addiction to opioids. So make sure that you listen carefully for that. There's some hope for anyone who might be listening today who is struggling with addiction. So enjoy my conversation with Patrick Nelson. As always, share it with other people that you think would benefit from listening to the chat. And thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Patrick, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
That's awesome. Please introduce yourself to the audience. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Patrick Nelson. I am the founder and CEO of Loyalty Point Leadership, a small leadership development consulting firm. And I have the honor and privilege of being able to speak with a variety of organizations and industries across the world, inspiring their employees to speak up, to have courage, and to influence the future.
So I've talked to, many folks who've been in the military. I've had a former Navy SEAL who was, on the ground, one of the Jocko's guys on the ground in Ramadi and all that kind of stuff. So tell us a little bit about your background in the military, how you got into it, what that was like.
Yeah. So like a lot of people at that time, I was 3 weeks into my first semester at a small community college in rural Minnesota when 9/11 happened. Really wasn't going anywhere in life. I had a pretty tough childhood, for just lack of a much better description. Growing up, saw drugs in the house. My mom got arrested when I was in 6th grade, coming out of school, right in front of my entire school.
Nice.
And
good job,
not the
Mom.
best background. Wasn't really going places in life. And 9/11 happened 2 days later. Like many people, dropped out of college, joined the Army. And I was stationed about 4 years in Italy, almost 3 years in Germany as a paratrooper, did Iraq for 12 months, Afghanistan for 12 months, and then Afghanistan again for 15 months on my last tour. But it was that first deployment to Afghanistan. It was June 8th, 2005. I was operating out of a small forward operating base, the Pakistani border. We're going to resupply some ammunition by a Chinook helicopter. Right before we rolled out to the landing zone, my soldier, Manuel Hernandez, had hopped in the back of our Humvee. And I turned around and I noticed he didn't have his helmet on. So I literally opened my mouth to really yell at him. And of course, I realized that, I don't have mine on either. It's obviously kind of hard for me to say something if I'm not doing the right thing. The same thing. Helicopter landed, a group of 10 of us stepped over to the side of the aircraft, and a 107 millimeter rocket landed right next to us. Unfortunately, Emmanuel and another soldier was killed. He took shrapnel through his head. I was peppered in the back, some shrapnel, some small holes, very, very minor compared to everybody else. And it's one of those situations where I really beat myself up for a long time after that incident. I tried to drink my problems away. I tried to wash them away with pills. I was addicted to Vicodin and morphine for 5 years. It's a miracle that I survived that. Of course, that works. Those only serve as accelerants for challenges I was already facing. But again, thankfully, I've learned I can take this story and inspire others, and I can influence the future.
So let me take you back then. It may seem like an obvious question, but why did you want to join the military after 9/11?
I felt it was my opportunity to do something.
Right.
Again, I grew up in rural Minnesota. I didn't have a lot of exposure to the rest of the world. And I felt it was my opportunity to get out there and do something. And the fact, I was 18 years old in my life, ready to go out there. I was a fit individual. I could go serve my country. And I saw it as a great opportunity, again, like many people did.
And you joined you said the paratroopers?
Correct. I was very fortunate to be stationed with the historical 173rd Airborne Brigade based in Vicenza, Italy.
And why paratroopers? Why not some other branch of the military?
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting is when I joined, I actually first got sent to in Germany that didn't even have my job, the technical aspect of my job, which is field artillery. I show up to this unit, they're like a rocket launch unit. And so since they didn't have my job, they assigned me as the colonel's driver. Now, I didn't drop out of college after 9/11 to, drive a colonel around and make sure his coffee was hot. I was at a training exercise one in Germany. I saw these guys parachuting out of the back of a helicopter. And I looked up, I was like, that's the stuff I want to do. And thankfully, my first sergeant was right next to me. He had all the right connections, and I was able to get down to that unit.
Oh, that's great. So what was the parachute training like? Was it demanding? Was it easy? You get different stories. How did you respond to the challenges of that training?
Yeah, it was pretty easy. I like to say, look, airborne school is 3 weeks long. It's held down at Fort Benning, Georgia. After the first week, they separate the boys and the girls and the women. Then after the second week, they separate the men and the women from the fools. In the third week, the fools jump out of the airplanes. Now,
yeah, right.
the first week of airborne school, it's known as ground week. It's a lot of very basic classroom type instruction. And I'll just never forget one of these first classes. The instructor's up at the front of the room. He's letting us know when you exit out of a C-130 aircraft, count to 4, and your main parachute should open up. And if for some reason it doesn't, immediately activate your reserve parachute. This young soldier at the back of the room, fresh out of basic training, real young kid, real eager. He's bouncing out of his seat, earrings in his hand. He's like, Sergeant, how long do you want me to count for my reserve parachute to open up? And the sergeant just looked at him and said, you got the rest of your life, get that reserve parachute to open up.
That's interesting. Now, when you went to Iraq first and then Afghanistan?
That's correct. Yep.
So how much combat did you see while you were there?
We fired the first rounds in combat for our brigade since the Vietnam War. Actually, my section did. That was April 6, 2003. And then it was pretty much combat from then on out. For Iraq, it was part of the initial invasion right away. We came in from the north, and then it was 12 months there where it was just kind of the Wild West, honestly. I can't think of a better way to describe it, because it was really the beginning of, we had the invasion, and then it was a very brief sort of lull. And then it was the buildup of the insurgency that we saw in the years afterwards. And then we went to Afghanistan, and I saw more combat in Afghanistan in those first probably 4 months than I saw even in the 12 months I was in Iraq.
Right.
But at the time, Iraq was sort of the sexy war that was getting all the attention in the media and everything. Afghanistan, there wasn't as many troops compared to Iraq there. It wasn't getting a lot of attention, but I certainly saw much more combat in Afghanistan than I did in Iraq.
What was the fundamental cultural difference between Iraq and Afghanistan interacting with the people there that you noticed?
Oh, huge difference. Not a lot of interaction from my experiences with the population during my deployments to Iraq. Actually, during Afghanistan. First one to Afghanistan, I maybe saw a total of 15 or 20 civilians my entire time there. We're out in the middle of nowhere on the Pakistani border, and we didn't really interact with the local population. When I was in Iraq, it was all the time walking the streets, going on patrols. We lived in a safe house in a neighborhood. We had neighbors who were Iraqi, literally right across the fence from us. The kids would come up to the fence and ask for candy and all this kind of stuff. And we'd go walk through the markets and the bazaars and all that kind of stuff.
What are some of the fundamental misunderstandings that Americans have about either Iraq or Afghanistan culture and society that hinder us from executing a mission there or blind us to the realities of life on the ground?
That's a really great question, Eric. So you're not doing this, but Iraq and Afghanistan, two very different countries.
Yeah, I understand that.
Iraq, you've got the Sunni and the Shia, and then you've got the Kurds in the north, and also a very small population of Turkmens.
Yep.
And so, working with those different groups is very challenging. And at the same time, like these people, they just want to go about their day. They don't, I don't think, inherently hold hostility against America or Western countries. But at the same time, when you have somebody coming into your country, for lack of a much better word, screwing things up based on how their normal life was under Saddam, which wasn't great, they'll readily admit that.
Right.
It, kind of throws your life for a curveball. There's bombings, all this kind of stuff. It's very difficult. While Afghanistan is very tribal. I couldn't even list all the different tribes that
Yes.
exist there. And Afghanistan, those people, all they've known is war.
Yes.
From the Soviets in the 80s to the Taliban takeover in the early 90s to the US and the coalition forces coming in. These people are 100% survivors. They will do whatever it takes to get by. And they work both sides of it during the conflict. Again, these are from my experiences.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
They want to get well projects and utilities and road projects from the US, but at the same time, they get threatened by the Taliban and again, it's not only the Taliban there or even Al Qaeda. There are so many different factions of enemy that we were fighting over there. It was hard for me to even keep up. And I'm sitting there reading all these intel reports and everything. It's very much a different beast. And the people there are just kind of caught in the middle.
Do you think that the stated American policy of creating a space for democracy, quote unquote, both in Iraq and Afghanistan was naive?
Yeah, I definitely think it was. Those countries, we tried hard. You look at the investment that we made, not only in the amount of dollars, but also the blood and the sweat equity and the sacrifices that were made. And still these countries are still having very difficult times. It's just not how their people want to be governed.
Yeah.
And I think they want some aspects of democracy, but they don't need to look just like the United States does. And unfortunately, our government has had a history of trying to force that upon people. Yeah. Well, at the same time, too, I look at the reasons that we went into each country, which again, very different reasons. I don't regret anything that I've done.
Right. We
did a lot of good. We helped a lot of people, but especially with Afghanistan, eventually you got to draw the line somewhere. And it was ugly. It wasn't great. In hindsight, things are always 2020 and we could have done it much better, much differently, but it was time for us to leave.
Isn't it interesting, though, because you think about, the British experience there when they had an empire, you think about the Russian experience, you think about the American experience. And, it's interesting how these quote unquote sophisticated empires go into these countries thinking that they're going to succeed. And they come up against the reality on the ground and they keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. What do you think it is in human nature that leads us to repeat the same mistakes over and over again?
Well, I think there was an attempt made by the United States to learn from the mistakes, the Soviets and even way back, like you said, the British. I remember having to read a book called The Bear Went Over the Mountain. It was a book by a former Soviet general about the experience in Afghanistan. We had to read it before we went there. So there were attempts to learn from those mistakes, but I think a lot of it is people being a little bit naive that our way is better and our way will work here because we're different than them. And when in the end, you get the same result.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
It's interesting. Very interesting. So if you were giving advice to the political and military leadership of the United States in retrospect, how should we have prosecuted our intentions or our purposes in Iraq and Afghanistan if we were to do it all over again?
Well, in Iraq, obviously, we look back at the situation that was there with the inspectors coming in. Does Saddam have a nuclear, biological, chemical? There was a lot of false intelligence that was put out there. At the same time, too, I think they tried a lot of diplomatic channels and they weren't getting anywhere. And I think a lot of it was just, Saddam Hussein was a dictator and how he ruled the country. And it's like, if you would have just listened, and how much, if you would have just let us in and let us do the thing. But unfortunately, egos get in the way on both sides. And I think we saw that on both sides. You think back to the first Gulf War and President Bush's father, being in command at that time, and then his son coming up. And again, when I went into Iraq, we came in through the north. The Kurds were lining the streets waving homemade American flag signs for us, right? Throwing flowers at us. Absolutely loved us. It was like, liberating Paris, it felt like. And you felt like, wow, we're doing something really, really good here. But at the same time, obviously, as it drug on, we got stuck into this quagmire. And we just kind of really dug our heels in and tried to invest all this money. And it didn't work out. The States can't be global policemen or women for the entire world. There's travesties going on in every single country. People maybe much smarter than me. That's their job to kind of pick and choose some of those battles. And it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback a lot of that, in hindsight. And I'm glad that I don't have to make those decisions. Afghanistan, 9/11, harboring Osama. Yeah, we had to go do something. Obviously, he retreated. You're fighting Al Qaeda. You're fighting Taliban, who's the government there. Very different animal. I'm glad that I went to Afghanistan. I know we went there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
again, it's a very corrupt country by nature. That's how they operate. And all the fraud, the waste and abuse of the billions and even $1 trillion that was spent and invested in that country. It's very sad to see. There's a lot of great people in those countries, and a lot of them have come to the United States that I've been fortunate to help, some of my former interpreters. And it's some of the most rewarding work that I've done is seeing them flourish here in the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my neighborhood, and I mean literally in my neighborhood, right across the street, there's a whole bunch of Afghan immigrants. They hang out at the park all the time. And it's just interesting to see them come over here. And like you said, it's good if they have an opportunity to flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the park. My new book, Frontline Leadership, How to Eliminate Complacency, Build All Engagement. I share a story of meeting a former Afghan commando at our local park. Going up there, I noticed the Afghan flag on the back of the car, which I'm familiar with the Afghan flag. And I go up and I start talking to this guy, and actually it was his 12-year-old son that was interpreting for us. But I share that story in my book and just sort of the conversation and friendship that him and we donated a bunch of clothes to his family, we provided them with some funding and all that kind of stuff. And then they, of course, like Afghans are their hospitality is second to none. Brings us feast food over to our house. And just a great experience for our daughters to be able to, sort of see that other side of different cultures and diversity across the world.
Yeah, it's a trip though, because one thing I like about the Afghans in our neighborhood is that they love the park, so they're hanging out there all the time.
Absolutely.
And as Americans, we tend to be a little more isolationist, kind of sit in our houses, right? But they're like, nah, let's go hang out at the park.
Yeah, absolutely. They love the sense of community and being able to gather.
Yep. It's interesting though. One more point on this. I know we're kind of off topic, but it's fine. You mentioned tribalism in Afghanistan, which, I'm at least superficially familiar with, but it's interesting how you mentioned the second Bush president. And so that idea of tribalism just popped right into my head, right? Because, his dad was the president and, who knows what kind of motivations he had to accomplish something in Iraq, either to emulate his father or to finish what his father started, stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I definitely think it was trying to finish, from my opinion, what his father had started. Absolutely.
So let's go. You mentioned this idea of ego, right? And, construction is an industry where egos, I wouldn't say rampant, but they're often prevalent. What is the relationship between ego and a safety culture?
Yeah, definitely a big relationship between them. Look, we look at the construction industry. There's a lot of alpha males out there.
Yeah,
we know that. There's been a lot of progress made. Females in construction, some pretty amazing things. There's a lot of great groups and associations and really beating the drum and bringing more awareness to it. But there's a lot of alpha males out there, and there's a lot of pride. And sometimes a lot of it is due to that legacy mindset that people had when they, pardon my language, but they broke out in the shit and get days of the construction industry where things were different. We didn't have, there weren't men or women around on the jobs. PP, what's that? We don't care about that. What's this, the jobs thing? No, that doesn't work here. We got to get the job done. Yep. So there's some of that legacy mentality that's been brought forward, and we're seeing the younger generation come in. We've seen a lot of great organizations that have started to shift and really invest in their cultural development while still maintaining, industry leading results and being really safe. The one thing that I've seen from the individual level is it's the pride factor. People don't like being called out that they're doing something wrong, right? It's just innate human thing. We don't like speaking up for fear if we might be wrong. I preach a lot of times about the job and stop work authority and the concepts around that. And, I talk about the misconceptions around it. One of the big misconceptions is like people hear the word stop the job or stop work authority. And they think, well, I'm pushing the red. I'm shutting that entire project down. We're bringing everybody together for 5 hours and we're going to talk about this thing till we're blue in the face. I mean, stopping, very rarely is that the case. Stopping the job could just be you and your buddy taking a step back. Like, so you're going to drive over here and then I'm going to lift this up here and okay, good. We're on the same page. Let's get back to work. That was 97.
Right.
The other misconception is people think they're going to get in trouble if they slow things down. It's because there's so much pressure to be able to perform and deadlines that are being met. I've sat through a lot of toolbox safety talks. Says nobody has ever said whatever you do today, you can't slow down.
Right.
Everybody always says safety first, slow down if you need to. Everybody here can stop the job. But what happened? Foreman, that project manager, they turn around all of a sudden, they get on their phone. They're like, we just got to get this done. And they're walking so fast and like their behaviors and their words just don't have that alignment. It's sort of this mixed signal that gets to people. We say all the right words, we brief all the right words to people, but all of our other actions don't really have that.
You spoke earlier about the courage to speak up. Why is it that people lack that courage, or what is it about the environment or their own inner game that causes them to see something and not say something?
Yeah, I think it's a variety of factors. And obviously, the culture of the organization is a big one. We think about how are people being treated when they do have the courage to speak up. If we got somebody out there that's going to sit there and holler at that new employee because they spoke up, they had a question, we think that employee's going to speak up again next time? I bet they're a lot less likely. And so again, it's not a new concept, but bringing this factor of care into the construction industry where people actually genuinely care about each other and they express it. Look, I'm not an OSHA type safety person. I can't talk to people about trenching or working at heights or lockout type. I don't know any of that stuff. I look at it from a leadership standpoint, but I know that the research clearly shows 99.1% of all safety incidents are preventable.
Right.
Save that loan, that's God that's out of our control. We obviously still have incidents. And I'll ask people, I say, tell me the reasons. And of course, they say, well, we already know. Complacency, shortcuts, distractions, fatigue, lack of training, lack of resources. I tell them, raise your hand if you've ever been guilty of one of those. Every hand goes up. We've all done it at least once, right?
So again, just stop there. That's interesting. What are those? Complacency? Tell me those again slowly.
Complacent, shortcuts, distraction, fatigue, lack of training, lack of resources. I mean, the list goes on and on. Everybody knows why they happen. The challenge is, look, we've all done it, but we've all taken the shortcut at least once, but we've been lucky. We're relying on a luck strategy. And that's what I did in Afghanistan with my personal story. Because guess what? We've done it like that 100 times before out there without our helmets on. Nothing's ever happened, but you're playing with luck. That luck's going to eventually run out if you keep doing it. It may not happen tomorrow, may not even be next week or next year, but if you continue to operate like that, that luck will eventually run out. Honestly, I just don't want people to find out. I don't want them to find out the hard way like I did. So my goal is just to share my message to inspire people. Also providing very practical tips to people. I focus around sort of two main pillars of the ideas of service-based leadership, forward-looking accountability. Now, service-based leadership is just, being able to meet the needs of others. And I don't sit there and spout a bunch of theory and principles of things. I actually give all these real-world stories. And I talk service-based leadership. I always talk about my former platoon leader on my first deployment to Afghanistan, a lieutenant by the name of John Post. That time, he's just a few years out of West Point, fresh out of college. That time, I'm 22. I'm already newly promoted sergeant. I got 12 months fighting in Iraq under my belt. Well, with that guy lacked an experience, he more than made up for his leadership behaviors because he's the type of guy that could sit you down, tell you the 12 different ways you sucked at life, but you leave the conversation with a smile on your face. It's just, you knew that guy cared about you.
So let me ask you about that. How did he actually communicate that? Because many of us, I think some of us struggle it's not that we don't care, but we come across as appearing not to care in the way that we communicate. So how did this officer communicate to you that he cared while giving you some straightforward feedback?
He told us. He actually went and told us that he cared about it. Look, he built these authentic relationships. He got to know his soldiers on a very personal level. And I tell people, all the research and the data clearly shows the more that you know somebody, the more likely you are to watch out for them, to have their back, and to make sure that they're safe. The research is very clear on that. And I tell people in the construction industry, I'm not saying you have to be best friends and have a sleepover on the weekend together, but there's value in developing those relationships, because when you have those relationships, it makes it a lot easier to be able to speak up to somebody and to say something. And the other idea around that, around the idea of making safety personal, is I created something called a safety stump speech, a brief yet powerful story on why safety matters to you. Now, telling stories in safety isn't anything new by any stretch of the imagination. But what I found, I go into organizations and I get one or two people I love telling my story. And that person gets up there and they're talking for 12 minutes, spinning their tires, talking to themselves in circles. They haven't gotten to the point yet.
Right.
And everybody is mentally checked out.
Yeah.
So I created this very easy template for people to share their message in a very brief yet personal way. So one of the first things I did in 2017, I did a lot of leadership development training with Marathon Oil. 2017, extremely bad year safety-wise for it. January 2018, their CEO gathers leaders from all over the field, brings them down to their corporate tower in Houston, basically saying, look, guys, we're going to put our heads together and figure this thing out, because what we're doing now isn't working. They asked me to facilitate the seminar, and I just watched as this Fortune 500 CEO got up and the guy started talking about safety. And he just towed the company line and say what's expected of him because it sounds good. And he's the CEO. That guy got up there and he started crying. And he told some very personal stories. And I watched how everybody in that audience responded to that. And so it made me think of actually my last deployment to Afghanistan. I was a squad leader leading combat missions. Prior to every mission, I used to have to give a pre-combat, briefing, much like here, our tailgates, our toolbox, our JSAs, that type of stuff. talk about what we're going to do for the day. And I faced some challenges that people face in the civilian world. My soldiers were more concerned with trying to find a pen that would work than they were listening to what I had to say, because they're hearing the same message every single day, stucking them into complacency. So I had to get a little creative, think outside the box. So one thing I do, and I know we got some people in the civilian world doing it, I started having one of my soldiers lead that briefing. I'd let them know the day before, I'd sit down, I'd help them prepare. And the next day I'd stand right next to them, throw them a lifeline in case he needed help. The other thing I do, went through my little checklist that they gave me. I tell a short personal story around one of those topics that my soldiers could relate with. And so out of that December at Marathon Oil, we created a 3-hour safety leadership workshop, unlike anything their organization had ever done safety-wise. All their previous safety training focused on the technical aspects. Here's how you wear your harness. Here's how you fill out this form. This brought the relevant discussions, out of your seat exercises, and equipped every member with that safety stump speech. We roll this out to the entire organization at Marathon Oil. At the field level, is 99% male dominated. They call themselves roughnecks. They work on oil rigs. They'll tell you they're not the most approachable people in the world. They come into the training, they put the spit bottle on the table, they cross their arms. They don't want to be there. It's not their first rodeo. I get up at the front, do my little song and dance, and I say at the end, each and every one of you is going to get up here and you're going to get to share your story as well. And you can imagine how excited these roughnecks are, because who doesn't love being forced to have to stand up and talk in front of others? Nobody.
So let me ask you a question about this stump speech. You said you gave them a template for that. Describe the template, please.
Yeah, it's a 3-part template. The first part is your view on safety, your belief on safety. It's usually one sentence. When it comes to safety, my view is we can mitigate a lot of risks if we wear a proper PPE. Second part is your personal story or connection to safety. You want to pull on the same thread throughout. So I started out talking about PPE. I share a short personal story around PPE. And then the third part is wrapping up by sharing what your commitment is going forward. My commitment to you guys is that I'm going to make sure you have all the piece of PPE that you need, you know how to wear it, that it fits you, and I want you to hold me accountable to that. So it's a 3-part template. The most powerful stump speeches I heard were 45 seconds to a minute and a half long. They're brief and they're personal, where people can share them at the tailgates of the toolbox. People in these workshops are able to write them out, and it's amazing. Again, I tell you, I tell the guys, you're going to get up here and share your story, and you can see how excited they are. They're just shooting daggers out of their eyes at me. By the end, every single one of these workshops, and I'm not exaggerating, we got guys arguing with each other about who is going to go next, who is going to get up and speak next.
So let me ask you then, with that safety stump speech, is that something that one person would give at the beginning of a safety meeting?
Yep. At the beginning of a safety meeting, a little gathering of people for 5 minutes. Absolutely. That's the point of it. It's not this big formal campaign speech or anything like that. It's just an opportunity for people to build those personal connections. And, when these black hats, roughnecks got up there and they started talking about safety, like they get up there and tell their story, they look their colleagues in the eye, they'd say, I care about you. A lot of them shed tears.
Right.
Like that's the kind of stuff, in my opinion, as an outsider for safety, that's going to help you move the needle. It's not the end all be all. It's another great tool in our safety leadership toolkit. And the Marathon Oil story is a great case study, because since 2017, they've seen a great reduction in their total reportable incident rate. And I've been very fortunate to continue to work with them to this very day. And they just have this strong, mature safety culture where, leaders are visible. They're out in the field. They're talking. They're getting to know people. They're still doing their great safety training around the technical aspects, but they also focus on the culture of it as well.
Hey, this is Eric. Quick break to remind you about my book. It's really interesting. I was chatting with one of my clients about Construction Genius, the book here. The thing that he really likes is that the tactics, tools, tips, strategies that are packed in here are real life to construction, and they resonate deeply with him. And so what I want you to do, if you haven't bought this book yet, you need to buy it. Go out to Amazon. There are $20 each, $19.99. Purchase a copy for you and your leadership team. If you purchase more than 10 copies, 10 or more, then shoot me an email and I'll reply, and we can set up a 1-hour question and answers session with some bonus leadership training as a thank you for purchasing 10 of those books. Now, I would normally charge $2,500 to $3,500 an hour for my time. You get it for only $200. That's what 10 books will cost you. So go out to Amazon, get yourself a copy of the book. It's killer, and I know you'll enjoy it. And now let's get back to the interview. Okay. Let me ask you about, you said you were on the Vicodin and the morphine. How did you get off that?
Not the smart way. I went cold turkey, and obviously it worked out. I'm here now, but going through it was extremely challenging. It was a situation, obviously we know about the opioid epidemic in the construction industry. We've all heard about it.
Yeah.
It took me about 4 years to even realize I had a problem to think that I was addicted to this. I got out of the military, had a couple surgeries, some shrapnel in my back, and I just had this pain all of the time. And I accept 100% accountability for the addiction that I had, but the VA certainly made it very easy for me to continue just to get pills. I'd go online, they'd send them right in the mail for me. They made the process very easy. And it took me a while to realize that I actually had a problem. But once I did, that's when I was like, okay, I got to do something here. And I didn't quite know what. I was very high functioning on the outside, but on the inside, I was a mess. I was going down a very bad path in my life. And finally, I decided one time, you know what, I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm not going to get any more pills. I can't even have them. If I need quick, I got to take one. It's been a few hours, whatever. And it was hell. It was extremely hard. I was actually in a hotel room on my first night. And I was laying on the floor, just like writhing, like it just felt like my skin was crawling. And what I remember worse is the heartburn, like my chest was just fire. And it was an experience that I don't wish on anybody. And I know in hindsight, it's not the smartest way to do it.
Why do you say it's not the smartest way?
Well, I know that there's a lot of great resources out there now to help you sort of step off opioids that are strong like that. There's a lot of even other medications that sort of help you step down and be monitored to be able to do that.
Sure. So what enabled you to get through the hell? Winston Churchill says, if you're going through hell, keep going. So how did you keep going?
Honestly, I think you think about the story of my life, growing up, no father figure inside, all the adversity that I faced over my life, I felt like I didn't have another option. I mean, it's very black and white for me. It's like, well, either I keep taking this stuff or I don't. I had goals and ambitions and dreams, and I knew if I was going to be on this stuff, I wasn't going to be able to do it. And it's very black and white for me. It's like, well, you got a choice. You can either stay down or you can keep getting back up. So I decided.
How long did it take going cold turkey for your body to adjust?
It was about 2.5 days.
Now,
it wasn't bad at all.
So that's the thing, right? So I think because if anyone's listening to this, whatever you're addicted to, it doesn't take that long for the body to adjust, right?
Right. Yeah. 2.5 pains of some really crappy stuff for a renewed outlook on life, better health, 100% worth the investment.
So that's one thing I just, I want to make a note of that to anyone out there who is struggling with an addiction. Your body is remarkable, and, your body chemistry can change relatively quickly, and that can help you to, you can overcome these things. And obviously, like you were saying, Patrick, there are different ways of going about it, from cold turkey to the step down and all that kind of stuff. But just something for people to keep in mind. Let me ask you, from the military, sounds like you were an NCO. Were you ever an officer?
No, I got out as an E6, a staff sergeant.
Okay, staff sergeant. So when I think of someone who's an NCO, the analogy in construction would be like to a superintendent, right?
Yep.
Someone who's in the field, leading guys. What are some of the key leadership lessons you learned in the military that you think translate well into construction? I know not all of them do, but which ones do?
Yeah, look, you got to be able to lead yourself first if you expect people to follow you. You better have your own house in order.
Yeah.
That's about doing the right thing, having these high levels of self-awareness, of understanding, not only what your strengths and weaknesses and all that stuff are, but it's also understanding how do you impact those around you? What are some of those, uncovering those blind spots that you have? I like to use the analogy of, I don't know, Eric, if you're a fan of the TV show The Office, but Michael Scott,
Sure.
I like to use him as somebody who lacks quite a bit of self-awareness. That man quite doesn't understand the impact that he has on those around him, and how he sees himself is a lot different than how others see himself. One is just, you uncover that through open lines of feedback and communication, and having high levels of trust and vulnerability with people. So it's developing those authentic relationships. It's knowing yourself. It's understanding and accepting that I don't care what rank you are, what your position on the organizational chart is. We all have weaknesses and limitations and things that we're not good at.
Right.
Having awareness around it, accepting those, and investing in having that growth mindset. In the second aspect.
Let me just ask you about that, though, about self-awareness. I think many high-functioning leaders struggle with this because what makes them high-functioning and high-performing is a particular aspect of their personality that in some cases rubs other people the wrong way. And what they struggle with is, why do I need to adapt myself to these people when what makes me successful is the very thing that rubs them the wrong way? What would you say to a leader who has that kind of mentality?
Yeah, look, that's the challenge that I face in the work that I do. I know that my style, how I approach people, how I come off, is not everybody's cup of tea. And guess what? Not everybody is somebody's cup of tea. There are going to be people that I can go in and I can give a great keynote or lead a great workshop and I get all these rave reviews from people, but you're always going to get one person that's just like, that was the worst of my life. Yeah. Right. There are people like that. You're just not this solid. So I think one is accepting that. And two, also understanding, I think a good leader is like, look, what got you to where you're at today? Yeah, that's great, but it may not be what gets you to the next level of where you need to be. And so it's being able to step outside of your own shoes, having that perspective. And look, the military, where I cut my teeth, one of the greatest leadership laboratories in the world, you wear your rank on your uniform every single day. Everybody knows exactly where you are in that hierarchy.
Yeah, right.
Guess what? You still find leaders at the lowest levels. You're not in charge of anything. I like to tell people, look, you manage things. It might be data, processes, equipment, schedules, but you lead people. We expect leadership out of managers, right? We don't always get it. I venture to say, everybody listening right now, at one point in their careers, they've had a manager who they would not consider, but yet I bet they've known people who are not managers, not in charge of anything, who are absolutely leaders. If you could build a perfect leader right now, here's what you'd probably say. They're empathetic, they're good listeners, they're accountable, they're credible, they're motivating. We know what good leadership looks like. None of that is exclusive to being in charge of people. It's not like, well, okay, Eric, now you got promoted. Now I want you to be a good listener. Now I want you to be accountable. Those are things that I firmly believe every single person can build and develop with the right experiences. And so when we manage people, we get compliance. Like they do what we tell them to do because they have to, because we're in a position of authority. But what a leader really gets is they tap into that discretionary. They lead through influence and they get that extra effort that people are going to give, not because they have to, but because they want to.
Isn't that many times that discretionary effort, though? It's interesting because some of these things are innate to a leader and they seem to be difficult to learn. Either you have them or you don't. Is that correct or am I off base there?
Maybe a little bit off base. So again, I'm a leadership geek looking at stats, data of the research. Yeah. The University of Minnesota, my home state, has a center for the study of twins. Started back in 1979. One of the first studies they've done, they took twins who were separated at birth, identical twins separated at birth, longitudinal study, followed them for years and years and years, well into their adult. Yep. They're continuing to enroll participants to this day. What they found is that 30% of what people identify as making somebody a more effective leader are things that we inherit in our DNA.
Sure.
Proven it. Everything from good looks to charisma to your height to even to your IQ to a certain extent. Science has proven with the DNA. Now, thankfully, for those of us that missed out on the DNA lottery like myself, we got the other 70% we can rely on. Mm-hmm. Things that we can grow, develop, and get better at. I think everybody has that opportunity, but I think it's how people seize that opportunity to actually do something with it. Not everybody is cut out to be a great leader. Even though we can all learn and develop and grow to most of the attributes, doesn't mean everybody's going to be able to do that. I think there is, whether we want to call it grit or that it factor that people have that's going to help them rise above the rest. But there is something that sets people apart, that, they seize opportunities and they're also proactive. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I really communicate to people when I'm talking just regular leadership, not safety focus, is being proactive out there and doing things that might be outside your comfort zone that, hey, I might fail at this, but I'm going to learn a heck of a lot. This is going to be a huge growing opportunity for me right here. And a lot of times those situations, you got to be proactive with them. It's not going to be the phone ringing and your boss saying, hey, I got this great opportunity for you to go do something over here. Sometimes you got to be proactive and you got to go ask for those situations. You have to go find them. You got to find them yourself.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned charisma earlier. What do you mean by charisma? What is charisma?
Yeah, that's, I certainly don't know the dictionary definition, but I think charisma is just that way that people carry themselves and how they relate to other people. It's the energy that people have and their ability to be able to communicate. And I think sort of draw people into them. And you think of like a group of young kids, maybe 4 or 5 year olds. You can always pick out the 1 or 2 kids that are sort of the leaders of the pack that those other children are just sort of drawn to.
Right.
And there's something about that kid that sort of sticks out and draws those others too.
Yeah. Interesting. So going back to your military experience, what are some leadership principles that you learned in the military that are not applicable in the civilian world? Because a lot of times people want to wholesale take everything from one arena and plug it into another, and it just doesn't work. So tell me about that.
Well, that's because they don't understand the idea of having these flexibility. I firmly believe the principles that I learned are completely transferable to the civilian world. But what people do is they're square peg in the round hole. They're trying to do things exactly the same. A lot of things in the military are pretty black and white. And so it's about having that cognitive flexibility of taking something that we learned and bringing it to the civilian world and say, look, we might have different parameters here, and different constraints of how we get things done. But I think the basic principles still apply. And one of the concepts that I think a lot about is this idea known as forward-looking accountability. Now, traditional notions of accountability are sort of mirror focused. Like, if somebody does something wrong and, we're going to point the finger at them and they are going to get in trouble for it. That's a lot like our judicial system, and rightfully so. Forward-looking accountability is having this mindset of not pointing the finger at somebody else, but is pointing the thumb back at you. And that was something I learned in the military. So I learned a couple hard lessons on accountability during my time in the Army. So I got promoted to the rank of sergeant between my deployment to Iraq and my first one. And we're actually up in Germany training. Been there for about a month and a half.
Where in Germany were you?
So at that point, we were up in Grafenwoehr, Germany, eastern part of Germany.
Okay.
So when we got back down to Italy, my buddies and I, we want to go and celebrate this big promotion of mine. And we had a plan. We had a designated driver. And we went and just tore that town up. Well, coming back that night / early morning, I'm pretty inebriated in the front passenger seat. And I wake up to flashing lights, the Italian Carabinieri, Italian police, random checkpoint. But I'm not worried because, we got a DD. Turns out our DD did not have an Italian license. So we get detained by the Italian Carabinieri, who call the military police, come pick us up, bring us back to base, wake up our commander and first sergeant in the middle of the night, saying, hey, you got some knuckleheads here. And I got hit with Article 15, field grade Article 15, which is non-judicial punishment. And so I was living in an apartment in the city of Vicenza, Italy, had to move back into the Army barracks, restricted to base for 45 days. I had 45 days of extra duty. I'm working 5 a.m. till midnight for 45 days straight. They took a half month's pay away for 2 months, and they normally take your rank. They demote you. But my commander actually went and fought for his commander for me to keep my rank, which is just virtually unheard of. At that time, I had a real hard time understanding. I'm not the one driving the car. Why am I getting, the most severely punished? That's not my fault. That's his fault. Right. But again, that's not leadership and that's not accountability. And so that prepared me for a situation where the stakes were a little bit higher.
So you got a severe punishment because you were the ranking person there. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it was my responsibility.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
And
slow down a little bit when you tell these stories, by the way, because they're good, but you're talking real fast.
Oh, sure. I didn't know if you're short for time. Sorry.
No, you're good. Don't worry. I'm not short for time. It's good.
Okay. And so that prepared me for a situation where the stakes a little bit higher. Summer 2007, I'm sitting up at a small observation post in the mountains, northeast Afghanistan. I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie The Outpost?
About it. The documentary?
That's Restrepo.
I saw Restrepo. Yeah.
So that was my brigade on our last deployment to Afghanistan.
Oh, wow. So you're, that's pretty trippy. Yeah, that's quite I'm sure
so
that was
I wasn't in that documentary, but I was stationed to the north there. But Outpost is an actual Hollywood movie based on this place called Top Keating. I'm in Outpost Keating. So anyways, I'm sitting up at this observation post in the mountains of northeast Afghanistan, summer 2007. No running water, no hot chow, 14 soldiers up there, and I'm the highest ranking. So I'm the boss. I'm in charge.
Right.
And our mission was twofold. We served overwatch over the valley below, and we had this intent that allowed the two bases that were in east side of the mountains to be able to communicate due to the geographical interference. And with a small 5K generator, kept the batteries and the antenna powered up. So every once in a while, a Chinook helicopter would fly in with a 500-gallon fuel blivet sling loaded underneath, hanging from a rope, tractor tire. And now we're literally on a mountain. So our landing zone is flat, but it's not level.
Right.
And the helicopter would hover overhead, fuel blivets hanging by a rope. It would gently set it down. We'd put a rock in front of it to chalk it off.
Right.
Helicopter would unhook the rope, fly away, go home. We've done it many times, trained for many times, daytime, nighttime, didn't matter. Except this time, I'm on a radio watch. Everybody took a shift on radio watch. Didn't matter that I'm the highest ranking. It's my turn. I watch as my soldiers go down to this little landing zone. Helicopter hovers overhead. She sets the fuel blivet down. My guys put the rock in front of it to chalk it off. The helicopter unhooks the rope, flies away, goes home. Just as my soldiers are getting ready to hook it up to this John Deere Gator vehicle that we have up there to kind of pull it back up the rest of the mountain, my soldier grabs that rock and yanks it out. 500-gallon fuel blivet starts picking up steam, rolling down that mountain. If you could envision a bouncy ball rolling down a mountain, this was just the 500-gallon version of it happening.
Yeah, right.
I'm yelling every 4-letter word I know except stop.
Right.
And, halfway down the mountain, it bursts open. If that would have been early on in my military career, I probably would have hopped on that radio so fast and would say, yeah, Eric pulled all the rock from under it. That's his fault.
Right.
Right. Because come on, you can't put that one on me. But again, that's not leadership and that's not accountability. I learned it's not about pointing the finger, it's about pointing the thumb. Like I had to look inside. There were things that I could have done differently that may have prevented it from happening.
Right. That's good.
Look, I could have just got my guys together right before. Look, guys, we've done this 100 times, but here's the task. And I didn't do that. Right. I could have made somebody take my radio shift. I had the authority to do that. So I could have been now there supervising, and I didn't do that either. So I had to hop on the radio, let them know I lost the fuel. It's my fault. Now they got to fly that helicopter back through that dangerous valley where they shoot RPGs, machine guns at them, risking their lives because I messed up. What I remember most from that day, later in that afternoon, conducting an AAR, after action review, what went right, what went wrong.
Yep.
And I just watched as every single one of my soldiers stood up and they said, you know what, Chief, if I was standing over here and if I would have said this or put this over here, none of them pointed the finger at Eric.
Right.
It was one of those, if you have children, one of those like proud parent moments where you're like, yes, you get it. Like you totally understand it. It's not about pointing the finger. A true test of a leader is not only being accountable when things are going right. More importantly, can you be accountable when things go wrong?
Yeah, that's interesting. So your willingness to take accountability yourself rubbed off on the people that you led, and they were willing to take accountability also.
Yeah, look, Eric, it's human nature. We mirror the behavior of others around us, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
If I'm not wearing my helmet on that landing zone in Afghanistan on June 2005, how could I expect Emmanuel to do it?
Right.
The good news is it works for good stuff as well.
Yeah, and that's great. That's great. So Patrick, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I know you have a book that you have published, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. My first book just came out recently. It's called Frontline Leadership, How to Eliminate Complacency and Build All-In Engagement. It's got all the stories you heard today, plus a ton more. A very inspiring book, but at the same time, also very practical. Every chapter ends with some very practical tips and challenges where people actually take something away and do something with it. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. You can check out my website, loyaltypointleadership.com. Find me on LinkedIn Connect. Would love to have conversations with people and continue just to share my message across the world.
Excellent. Yeah, and we'll have links in the show notes to all of those things. And Patrick, I really appreciate you coming on, and I do wish you all the best. Thank you for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation today with Patrick Nelson. In the show notes are links to his website and also links to his book on Amazon, which is called Frontline Leadership. Please go out and purchase that book. And I know that you'll benefit from that. And again, give Construction Genius a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.